Just
The
breathe.
Omega was followed everywhere by orphaned pups, until the Alpha King followed and saw
We are the
why.
same.
Forests spread in dark green waves across the land, and the wind carried whispers of old secrets, lost promises, and unseen dangers. No one in the kingdom spoke openly about the cursed line that haunted the royal family, but everyone had heard the stories. Lyra the Omega walked quietly through the cobbled streets of the capital, her gray cloak pulled tight around her shoulders. Wherever she went, a trail of small, orphaned, wolf-like pups followed. They were not ordinary animals. Their eyes shimmered with a soft, unearthly light, and they seemed to know her every thought. Children and merchants watched from the streets, whispering and pointing, but Lyra ignored them. She had long ago learned that attention brought only pain. The pups had been following her since she could remember. They arrived at her side without warning, appearing at dawn when the streets were empty, or at dusk when the shadows grew long. No one else could see where they came from, and the animals themselves never left. Lyra often wondered if they were a gift or a curse. Perhaps, she thought, she was never meant to be alone. Or perhaps she was never meant to belong anywhere at all. King Eric, the Alpha ruler of Eldralore, observed this phenomenon with an icy curiosity. From the high windows of his palace, he watched Lyra as she passed through the courtyard. His eyes were sharp, as if he could see every secret the world tried to hide. He had ruled for more than a decade, known for his iron will and unmatched cunning. Nothing escaped him, except, perhaps, the strange pull that Lyra seemed to exert over the kingdom's most mysterious creatures. "Why does she walk with them?" he asked his advisor, a man named Kellen. "These pups, they follow her, yes, but they do not fear anything. Not the dogs, not the soldiers, not even the shadows that haunt the city at night." Kellen shrugged, keeping his voice low. "Some say she carries a fragment of the old curse, the one that has haunted your family for centuries. Perhaps the pups are drawn to her, or perhaps they are warning us." Eric's lips pressed into a thin line. The thought of a curse in his kingdom stirred something he had tried to ignore. He had never believed in superstition, but some truths were difficult to deny. The pups had saved merchants from bandits, frightened away thieves, and even seemed to sense danger before it arrived. And always they returned to Lyra as though she were their heart and home. Lyra reached the edge of the marketplace and paused. The pups surrounded her in a loose circle, tails wagging, ears perked, as if sensing a new presence. She tightened her cloak and looked around. She had learned to trust no one, but she could feel someone watching her. The air shifted, colder and sharper, carrying the scent of authority and danger. It was Eric. He had descended from the palace without announcement, his long coat brushing the stones behind him. The sun, or what passed for sunlight in this twilight kingdom, caught on the silver clasp of his crown. Lyra froze for a moment, heart beating fast. She had heard of him, seen him in the distance, but never up close. There was something in his eyes that made her want to look away and run, but curiosity rooted her to the spot. "You are Lyra," he said, his voice calm but firm, cutting through the murmurs of the marketplace. "Do you know why I follow you?" Lyra shook her head, keeping her expression neutral. The pups growled softly, circling closer to her. "You carry something that belongs to my family," Eric continued. "Something powerful, something dangerous, and yet you protect it." "Why?" Lyra swallowed. She had not meant for anyone to notice, especially not the king, but the truth weighed on her too heavily to hide. "I do not choose this," she said quietly. "The pups, they come to me. I do not know why. Perhaps they are my burden or my blessing. I cannot tell the difference." Eric studied her closely. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also strength. A quiet courage that refused to bow, even in the face of him. He had seen many try to defy him and fail, but there was something different about her. She did not tremble before him, and yet she did not underestimate him either. A sudden noise broke the tension. A group of shadowed figures slipped through the crowd, moving too quickly, too silently. They were dark shapes, almost like smoke, and yet they carried teeth and claws that glimmered with an unnatural light. The townspeople screamed and scattered. The pups leapt forward without hesitation, forming a protective circle around Lyra, their small bodies bristling with energy. Eric's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but he did not move. He watched, fascinated, as the pups emitted a low, harmonic growl and the shadowed creatures recoiled. Lyra's face was pale, and her eyes shone with a strange power that he could not understand. The wind seemed to bend around her, whispering secrets in a language only the pups seemed to comprehend. The shadowed figures retreated, dissolving into mist as quickly as they had appeared. The marketplace was silent once more, save for the soft panting of the pups and the distant cries of frightened townspeople. Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted. Eric stepped forward carefully, his expression unreadable. He offered a hand. "You are stronger than I thought," he said softly. "But you cannot face this alone. Come with me. I will not let anything harm you." Lyra hesitated. She had always been alone, relying only on the strange bond she shared with the pups. To trust a king, even one as commanding as Eric, was more frightening than any shadowed creature she had faced. Yet there was something in his gaze, something that promised protection without possession. Slowly, she allowed him to help her to her feet. The pups nuzzled her, whining softly as if asking for reassurance. Lyra placed a hand on each of their heads, murmuring, "Stay close, but trust him for now." Eric nodded, his expression softening. "I am no ordinary man," he said almost to himself. "And you are no ordinary woman." As they walked toward the palace together, Lyra could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them. The pups followed, their soft steps echoing like whispers of destiny. The wind carried a chill, but it was no longer threatening. It was a herald. Something had begun, something that would change both their lives forever. The streets emptied as they passed. No one dared follow. The shadowed threat that had arrived was only a hint of what lay ahead, and the kingdom itself seemed to hold its breath. Lyra glanced at Eric. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. Could she survive what was coming? Not just the curse, but the power, the danger, the strange, undeniable pull between them. Eric's eyes met hers, and in that moment both understood the unspoken truth. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with peril and darkness, but also with something neither of them had expected: hope. And then from the deepest corner of the palace courtyard, a soft howl echoed, a signal, a warning, and a promise. The pups stiffened, ears pricked. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. Something was following them, something unseen. But this time, they would face it together. The palace of Eldralore was silent that evening, but silence in such a place was never empty. The walls whispered with secrets of the past, of kings who had ruled with fire, queens who had loved and lost, and shadows that lingered long after the sun had set. Torches flickered along the marble corridors, casting shapes that twisted and danced like living beings. Lyra walked beside King Eric, her hands folded tightly in front of her. The pups padded quietly behind, their soft steps almost in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She had expected grandeur, she had expected coldness, but she had not expected the strange pull she felt when she walked beside the Alpha King. His presence was commanding, yet there was a subtle warmth, a strange weight that made her pulse quicken. Eric led her to the palace library, a vast hall lined with shelves taller than any human could reach. Ancient tomes and scrolls filled the space with the scent of old paper and ink. The light from the chandeliers caught in the golden lettering of the books, giving the room a glow that was almost alive. "Sit," Eric said, gesturing to a pair of high-backed chairs. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he circled her slowly, observing her as a hunter studies a new prey, but with neither malice nor cruelty. His gaze was curious, probing, and Lyra could feel it deep in her bones. "You do not belong here," he said finally. "The palace is a place of power, politics, and watchful eyes, and yet you walk through it as though you have a right to be here." Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "I have no right," she admitted softly. "And yet the pups, they brought me here. I do not know why." "Perhaps it is fate." Eric's eyes narrowed slightly. Fate indeed. He had never believed in it before, but the way these creatures followed her, protected her, seemed almost like the kingdom itself had chosen her. The pups circled at the edge of the room, quiet now, but their eyes glowed faintly, as if warning him that something was being hidden, something important. "What are you hiding, Lyra?" he asked, stepping closer. His voice had shifted, no longer commanding but curious, almost tender. "You carry a power that the entire kingdom fears, and yet you do not seem afraid of it yourself." Lyra looked away, her fingers tightening around the folds of her cloak. She had tried for years to keep her secret safe, buried beneath the weight of silence. But now, in the presence of the king, the truth pressed against her chest like a living thing. "The pups saw they follow me because of the curse," she said finally. "I was born to protect them, to keep them safe. But the curse, it is not mine to break. I only carry its fragment, and sometimes I fear it will consume me." Eric's expression softened, the first crack in his icy demeanor. He had always ruled with certainty, with control, with power. But this was different. Here was a woman who carried a weight heavier than any crown, who faced danger without complaint, yet trembled with humanity. "You do not have to face it alone," he said gently. "The kingdom, I will help you, if you let me." Lyra's heart pounded. To trust a king, the ruler of all Eldralore, was frightening. She had seen power used as a weapon too many times to believe in kindness. And yet, there was something in Eric's gaze that made her want to believe. Something that whispered that he would not take advantage, that he would not demand loyalty he could not give. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she nodded. The pups stirred, sensing the shift in her emotions. They nuzzled her hands, their small bodies warm and comforting. Lyra took a deep breath. "Then, if we must face this, we face it together." Before Eric could respond, a sudden shadow moved across the room. Lyra stiffened, her senses alert. The pups growled low in their throats, forming a tight circle around her once again. Eric's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. The shadow took shape, forming into a figure of dark mist, tall and menacing. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its presence filled the room with a cold, unnatural chill. The air seemed to pulse with danger, and Lyra felt a tremor in the magic she carried, a warning that the curse was stirring. "You should not have come here," the shadow hissed, its voice like the wind through dead trees. "She is mine to consume. She cannot escape." Eric's jaw tightened. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the darkness. "Not while I stand." The shadow laughed, a sound that chilled Lyra's blood. It lunged toward her, but the pups leapt forward, teeth and claws glowing with soft light. Lyra raised her hands, feeling the familiar pulse of the magic within her. Energy surged through her, mingling with the pup's power. The shadow recoiled, screeching in pain, and for a moment the room was filled with brilliant, blinding light. When the light faded, the shadow was gone. The library was silent once more, save for the soft breathing of Lyra and the low growls of the pups. Eric stepped closer, his hand brushing hers as he checked that she was unharmed. "You are incredible," he said quietly. "Not because of the power you wield, but because you face it with courage, and because you are not afraid to protect those who cannot protect themselves." Lyra looked at him, her heart racing. "I do not know if I am strong enough," she whispered. "I only know I cannot let them suffer." Eric's gaze softened, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel for anyone. "You are stronger than you know," he said, "and you do not have to face it alone." For a moment, silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words. The air was thick with tension, a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and something that felt dangerously like desire. Lyra's fingers brushed against Eric's hand, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath. But then from the shadowed corner of the room, a new sound emerged, a whisper, faint but sharp, like the rustling of dry leaves. The pups stiffened, their ears pricked, and Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. "You cannot escape me," the voice hissed. "The curse will not be denied." Eric's eyes darkened. "Then we face it," he said firmly. "Together." Lyra nodded, though fear prickled at her heart. She had always known that the curse was more than just a burden. It was a test, a force that would challenge every part of her being. And now, with Eric at her side, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps they could survive this. Perhaps they could even find a way to end it. The pups whimpered softly, sensing the danger still lurking beyond the walls of the palace. Lyra knelt, gathering them close. "We will protect each other," she murmured. "No matter what comes." Eric watched her, his expression unreadable. He had ruled kingdoms, faced enemies, and commanded armies. But this was different. Here was a woman who moved him in ways he could not control, who challenged him without raising a weapon, who needed him not for power but for trust. As the torches flickered in the library, casting shadows that danced across the walls, both of them knew that the night was only beginning. The curse had awakened. The shadows had not yet been defeated. And whatever came next would test their courage, their loyalty, and the fragile bond that had begun to form between them. Lyra rose slowly, the pups circling her feet. "We should prepare," she said. "The shadows, they will not rest." Eric nodded, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "And neither will I," he said. "You are not alone. Not now, not ever." The wind howled outside, carrying with it a chill that spoke of danger, of magic, of secrets long buried. Lyra's heart raced, but for the first time she felt a strange warmth. Perhaps with him by her side she could face whatever the curse demanded. Perhaps, even in the darkness, there was a glimmer of light. And somewhere deep in the palace walls, the shadow stirred again, watching, waiting, and plotting. The forests outside Eldralore were alive with a strange, almost eerie energy. The trees stretched high, their dark branches tangled like the fingers of ancient giants. Shadows slithered among the roots and rocks, carrying secrets older than the kingdom itself. Every step Lyra took made the forest seem to bend around her, as though the trees themselves were watching, listening, waiting. Eric rode beside her on a black stallion, his cloak brushing the undergrowth. He had left the palace guards behind, choosing instead to travel quietly to understand the curse firsthand. He had seen her power, the way the pups reacted to danger, and he knew that what lay ahead could break even the strongest man. Yet he did not hesitate. Lyra's strength and her fragility drew him closer, pulled him into a world he had never known. The pups moved ahead, their soft, glowing eyes cutting through the twilight. They stopped at intervals, turning to check that Lyra and Eric were still behind. It was as if they were guiding the way, leading them toward a place Lyra had visited only once before, a sacred glade where the magic of her ancestors pulsed strongest. Lyra dismounted, brushing dirt from her cloak. She glanced at Eric. "We must be careful," she said softly. "The curse, it is stronger here. It knows me and it will try to test every part of me." Eric nodded, dismounting as well. He could feel the tension in the air, the pulse of old magic that thrummed beneath the soil. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The glade was hidden deep within the forest, surrounded by ancient stones carved with symbols older than any living memory. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting silver patterns on the ground. The air was thick with energy, and Lyra could feel the power coursing through her veins. The pups circled her, their glow brighter as though drawing strength from her presence. "This place," Eric whispered. "It feels alive." Lyra nodded. "It is alive. It is a memory of my ancestors, of the power we carried and the sacrifices we made. And now, it will judge me." She knelt at the center of the glade, closing her eyes. The wind stirred, carrying whispers in a language only she could understand. Her hands moved over the ground, tracing symbols long forgotten. The pups whimpered softly, sensing the stirrings of the curse. Eric watched her, every muscle tense, ready to act. He had faced armies, battles, and treachery, but nothing had prepared him for this. There was a fragility in Lyra, yes, but also a fierce courage that seemed to radiate from her very being. She was beautiful in a way that terrified him, beautiful and dangerous, strong yet vulnerable. The ground trembled beneath them. Shadows began to rise from the forest floor, twisting into forms that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Lyra opened her eyes, which now glowed faintly with the same light as the pups. She whispered an incantation, and the pups stepped forward, their small bodies bristling with energy. The shadowed forms lunged, but Lyra's magic flared, a protective wave that pushed them back. The light from her hands mingled with the glow from the pups, forming a protective barrier. The shadows hissed and recoiled, but they were relentless, pressing closer, testing her strength. Eric drew his sword, though he knew it could do little against such magic. He circled around her, a shield and anchor, ready to protect her from anything physical. He could feel the tension in her, the strain of the magic, the weight of the curse pressing down. She was magnificent, terrifying, and completely human all at once. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, "you are not alone. You do not have to do this by yourself." Her eyes met his, and for a moment the magic faltered. She saw the truth in his gaze, the trust, the care, the unspoken promise that he would stand by her. And in that brief moment the shadow surged forward, taking advantage of her distraction. Lyra stumbled, the energy around her flickering. One of the pups yipped, rushing to her side, but it was not enough. The shadows swirled, surrounding them, pressing closer. Eric stepped forward without thought, placing himself between Lyra and the dark forms. His sword glowed faintly in his hand, not with magic, but with the strength of his will, his determination to protect her. The shadows hissed and twisted, but Eric did not falter. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice carrying a power that seemed to push back the darkness. "Not while I am here." Lyra's hands trembled as she regained control of her magic. She drew the pups close, feeling their warmth, their loyalty, their connection to her. Together they formed a circle of light, a protective shield that forced the shadows to retreat. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the darkness withdrew, dissolving into the trees and the mist. When the danger passed, Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted. The pups clustered around her, nuzzling her hands and face. Eric knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "Not because of the magic, but because of you. You faced it with courage, and you never gave up." Lyra looked at him, her chest heaving. I could not have done it without you," she whispered. "You protected me. You risked yourself for me." Eric's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. "I will always protect you," he said. "Not because I must, but because I choose to." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of relief, admiration, and something deeper, something she had never allowed herself to feel. She had always believed that she would face the curse alone. That trust was dangerous. But here, in the heart of the forest, with the pups circling and the shadows gone, she felt the stirrings of hope. They sat in silence for a long moment, the forest around them quiet except for the soft breathing of the pups and the distant rustle of leaves. The moonlight bathed them in silver, and for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not alone, where the curse could be faced and perhaps even broken. But as the night deepened, a new sound reached them, a whisper, faint but clear, carried on the wind. It was not the wind itself, but a voice, echoing through the trees. "You cannot escape me," it said. "The curse will not be denied." Lyra shivered, her hands gripping the earth. "It is still coming," she murmured. Eric placed a steady hand over hers. "Then we will face it," he said firmly, "together." The pups whimpered softly, sensing the lingering presence of the curse. Lyra nodded, drawing a deep breath. She had always believed the curse would define her life, that it would shape her every action and thought. But now, with Eric at her side, She felt the possibility of something new, a chance to fight to survive, to perhaps even be free. Eric watched her, his heart beating faster than it had in years. He had never imagined that duty could lead to something like this, something that stirred his soul, challenged his control, and demanded trust. But he would not deny it. He would stand by her, face the shadows, and discover the truth of the curse with her. Together they rose, the pups at their feet, and stepped deeper into the glade. The night was thick, the danger real, but the bond between them had begun to take shape. It was fragile, yes, but it was also fierce, unbreakable in ways neither of them fully understood. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the forest, the whispering voice laughed softly. It was patient. It had waited centuries for this moment. The curse would not be broken easily, and the trials ahead would test every part of them, heart, mind, and soul. But for now, in the quiet of the sacred glade, Lyra and Eric stood together, a circle of light and loyalty surrounding them. The pups pressed close, their soft, glowing eyes reflecting the moonlight. And for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to hope. Even in darkness, even with danger lurking, even with a curse that threatened everything, they were not alone. They were together. The first rays of dawn struggled to pierce the heavy fog that clung to the kingdom of Eldralore. The land seemed suspended between night and day, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Lyra and Eric stood at the edge of the sacred glade, the pups circling around them, their soft glow a gentle contrast to the lingering shadows. The curse had grown stronger, fed by centuries of bitterness and fear. Dark forces moved unseen through the forest, gathering in anticipation of a final confrontation. Lyra could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest, a force that demanded sacrifice, courage, and unflinching heart. Eric stood beside her, silent and steady, his hand brushing against hers. He had faced armies, battles, and rebellion, but none of that compared to this moment. Here, power and vulnerability intertwined, and he realized that the strength he needed was not drawn from his crown or his sword. It was drawn from trust, from unity, from love. "The curse will not be easy to break," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "It wants fear. It wants doubt, and if we falter, it will destroy everything." Eric's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Then we do not falter, not while we are together." The wind rose suddenly, carrying with it the whispers of the shadows, twisting and cold. The forest itself seemed to come alive, branches bending like hands, shadows forming shapes that slithered toward them. The air crackled with tension, and even the pups' glowing eyes brightened in alarm. Lyra knelt at the center of the glade, her hands tracing the ancient symbols carved into the stone circle. Energy surged through her veins, mingling with the life force of the pups. She drew a deep breath, centering herself, allowing the courage she had built over the years to rise and meet the fear that sought to crush her. "Eric," she said softly, "the curse, it requires a sacrifice, but I do not know if I can do it alone." "You will not be alone," he replied firmly. "I am here. I choose to face it with you." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that resonated deep within her. For the first time, Lyra felt a spark of hope that did not tremble beneath the shadow of fear. Together, they could face whatever awaited. Together, they could confront the darkness and claim the dawn. The shadows surged forward, forming into monstrous shapes that seemed to flicker between this world and another. Lyra's magic flared, a radiant circle of light forming around her and the pups. Eric stepped beside her, drawing his sword, the steel catching the first light of the dawn and reflecting it like a beacon. "You cannot win," the shadows hissed in unison, voices sharp and cold. "She is ours. She is the key to power, to destruction." "Not while we stand together," Eric said, his voice carrying the force of conviction. Lyra raised her hands, drawing the magic deep from the glade, from the pups, and from herself. The light pulsed, brighter and brighter, until the shadows screamed and writhed, unable to withstand the purity and strength of the bond between them. The forest shook, branches snapping, stones trembling, but Lyra did not falter. She had learned to trust, to protect, to fight, not just for herself, but for those she loved. Eric moved closer, placing his hand over hers. Together, they channeled their courage, their unity, their shared desire for hope over despair. The shadows writhed, twisted, and then, with a final, echoing hiss, they shattered into motes of darkness that dissolved into the wind. The forest stilled, and the first true light of dawn broke through the fog, bathing the glade in gold and silver. Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted, the pups nuzzling her hands and faces. Eric knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "It is over," he said softly, though neither of them knew if it truly was. "The curse, it has lost its hold." She looked at him, her eyes glistening with relief and something deeper, something she had never allowed herself to feel before. "We did it," she whispered. "Together." Eric's lips curved into the faintest smile, the first warmth she had seen from him in months. "Yes, together." The forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the ancient trees standing taller, the wind calmer. The pups wagged their tails, leaping and nuzzling Lyra, as if celebrating not just the defeat of the curse, but the triumph of hope, courage, and trust. Lyra rose slowly, brushing the dirt from her cloak. She glanced at Eric, feeling the pull of something she could not name, yet understood fully. I never thought I would see the dawn like this," she said, her voice soft. "Not after all the shadows, all the fear." "You have earned it," Eric replied. "And so have we, both of us. Not because we are strong alone, but because we were brave enough to stand together." For a long moment they stood in silence, watching as the light spread across the forest, reaching toward the mountains, the rivers, and the kingdom beyond. Eldralor was waking, and for the first time in centuries, it seemed as though the land itself could breathe freely. The pups bounded ahead, playful and joyful, their glowing eyes reflecting the morning light. Lyra laughed softly, the sound clear and bright, mingling with the gentle rustle of the trees. Eric watched her, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun and everything to do with her presence. "You are not just the Omega," he said quietly. "You are extraordinary, and his voice faltered for a moment, then grew steady. "I am honored to stand by you." Lyra felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She had always believed that she would face the curse alone, that trust was dangerous, that love was a risk she could never afford. Yet here he was, offering her both protection and understanding, respect and care. And in that moment she allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for life, for companionship, for something brighter than shadows. The forest around them seemed to shimmer, the air carrying the scent of blossoms, of earth, of renewal. The glade pulsed softly, as if acknowledging the triumph of courage and unity. Then from deep within the forest came a soft, almost musical sound, a whisper not of danger but of promise. The curse had ended, its darkness shattered, leaving only the faintest echo in the wind. The pups wagged their tails, nuzzling Lyra and Eric, their eyes bright with joy. Eric took her hand gently, holding it between both of his. "The kingdom is ours to protect," he said softly, "but I hope you will allow me to protect you as well." Lyra looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity, the courage, the quiet love that had grown between them. For the first time she allowed herself to smile fully, without fear, without hesitation. "Yes," she said, "together." They walked back toward the edge of the glade, the pups running ahead, their joy infectious. The sun rose fully, casting golden light across the kingdom. Eldralor was alive once more, and so were they, stronger, wiser, and bound by a trust and affection forged in shadows and strengthened in light. As they emerged from the forest, Eric looked at Lyra, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. No shadow, no curse, no danger can break what we have." Lyra nodded, her heart swelling with a courage she had never known. The curse had tested her, the shadows had challenged her, but she had survived, and she had not survived alone. Together, they were more than the sum of their fears. They were a force, a bond, a light that even the darkest shadow could not touch. And somewhere behind them the forest sighed in relief. Eldralor would heal. The pups would remain, loyal and protective, symbols of hope and resilience. And Lyra and Eric, once strangers bound by circumstance, now stood side by side, partners, allies, and perhaps, in time, something even deeper. The sun rose fully over the kingdom, and for the first time in centuries, the people of Eldralor could see the promise of a future bathed in light, free from fear. And in the heart of the sacred glade, Lyra and Eric knew, without doubt, that even in a world shadowed by curses and danger, love, trust, and courage could conquer all.